Saruwatari Xtreme. Today we'll talk about Porsche, one of my favorite manufacturers. What I like about Porsche is you get a lot per dollar in performance, and also they're not extremely difficult to work on. Above that, parts are much more affordable than Ferrari or Lamborghini, and there are several outlets where you can get parts at a discount. Today I'll go over servicing the 996 Turbo, and possibly that could translate to helping you out with some of your service work. I've serviced all 6 of our P cars, and they all are kind of similar. So if you can work on one, you can kind of apply a lot of the principles to the others. You can find the brake fluid reservoir up in the front compartment. We just go ahead and pull the lid. Again, very careful with the brake fluid. I know I sound like a broken record here, but brake fluid on the paint is going to be a huge expense. So we set this aside. There's a small filter here. We fire up my friend, the brake fluid checker, put it into the reservoir to get our reading, and it reads okay. At the bottom of the scale, 0.1%. This tool works wonders. This brake fluid has been in the car for 2 years because I changed all my brakes to the Porsche carbon ceramics. And all you that are Porsche fanatics know that in 2001, carbon ceramics were not available. Theoretically, the brake fluid should need to be changed, but this tells there's no moisture or very little moisture in the brake fluid. That's a huge time savings. I mean, if you're going to go to a shop, it's an expense, but the time alone is well worth the investment in a tool like this. Starting back here with the engine compartment, I use a carbon fiber dual inlet intake that houses a factory-style K&N air filter element. I can see plainly that the element is in excellent condition. It's still well oiled, therefore I will not change it. If you have the factory air box, it's pretty straightforward. There's a retaining bolt that you need to remove right here by the latch. Then you want to pull the charge pipe. This clip can be pulled out by either using a pick or a screwdriver on the bottom, moving the clip downwards. Then you can pull the charge pipe out. It's very slick. Then the housing itself goes into a boot. With a hose clamp, you will loosen that, then that way it can rotate. There's one electrical connector up here, and that's for the mass airflow sensor. Disconnect that, move it aside. Then take the housing itself and rotate it upwards 90 degrees. Then you can move it and rotate it and work it out of the car. The housing opens up like a clamshell. That way you can inspect the element to determine whether or not you want to change it, back blow it, wherever your comfort level is. While it's out, it's great to check the drive belt, which is located right down here. If you don't pull the housing out, you can still check it. Just look between the air filter housing and the wide charge pipe. You can put your finger down there and feel the tension of the belt, and you can use a flashlight and actually see the condition of the belt. If you feel it needs to be changed, then you would have to pull the housing out for sure. I don't remember for sure, I haven't changed it for a while, but I think it's a standard. It just uses a tensioner and it'll come right out and you can change it fairly easily. I do recommend using an OE belt if possible. That will give you the longest lifespan most likely before you have to mess with it again. And this hole right here is the fuel filter. This car doesn't need the fuel filter changed, therefore we'll just leave it alone. If you want some instruction on that, ask me in the comments below. I'll be happy to help you out with that. The coolant reservoir is located right here. It's easily identifiable. Most of you know where it is. It's got the standard min-max. But if you didn't happen to watch the NSX maintenance video, I'm not a huge proponent of doing work that I don't have to. Therefore, I always test the coolant. So coolant itself keeps its property of cooling. What happens is it loses its protection elements over time to protect the metals and components on the engine and all the peripherals. So we'll test that and take a look at it and see how this one's doing to determine whether or not we should change it or if it's fine. Over here is a power steering reservoir. Porsche uses a different fluid, which you can get at the dealer or order it. I get it mine through Suncoast, but it calls for this Pentosin CHF 202. It's the latest and greatest. Don't use anything else. You want to definitely use what they call for, or you will be opening yourself up to a whole bunch of other problems. The dipstick is attached to the cap. Just turn it back, carefully pull it back because it's plastic, and you can see here it's got a cold level and it's at full. To test the coolant, we'll take the coolant test strip and use a clean needle nose plier. Then we want to remove the cap to the reservoir. Put the strip in the coolant for 2 seconds. Then we pull it back out. We've waited 30 seconds. Let's take a look at our results. First, we've got the freezing boiling point and the glycol level. As we look at the color chart, we are right between 50 and 60%. That'll work for me. Next, we'll go to the reserve alkalinity. Now, if we look real close at it, it is just below 6.6, and 6.6 is a pass. We should go ahead and go to the next check to see how that looks, and that is pH. If we go to pH, we are almost right on 7.5, which is in the middle of pass. Everything to me on the test is looking very good, so I will not be changing the coolant this round, and I'll take another test at the next service. We'll start with changing the engine oil. So before we go up in the air, we want to pull the cap for the engine oil fill. That way it'll allow us to evacuate the engine oil faster. The 996 Turbo does not have a dipstick. It uses an electronic readout on the dash that can't be measured until the engine oil is warmed up. I recommend using an oil pan. That way when you drain everything, you can measure everything out and make sure the exact amount of oil goes in. You want to usually add about a half a quart because you're also changing the oil filter. The first thing we want to do is drain the oil in the crankcase. That's this plug right here, and we can use a 15mm socket. We'll pull the crankcase drain plug. I'm going to pull the sealing washer back to make sure it comes with the plug if possible, so you don't have to dig it out of the pan. Start draining the oil. Once you've let it drain a little bit with a steady stream, you're in good shape. If you want to take an oil sample, now is an ideal time. Next, what we want to do is drain the oil tank or reservoir. The most important part of this process is making sure not to damage the oil tank. There is a nut that is actually a physical part of the tank to secure before you pull the plug. A 27mm wrench can go up on top to counteract the force of the socket. Then a 19mm socket will go on the plug to counter the ratchet to pull the oil tank plug. Okay. Once it's broken, it can be pulled by hand. Each turbo has an oil return reservoir. It's right underneath and one on each side. If you pull the plugs, you can drain the small amount of oil that is in the turbos. An 8mm Allen will pull them. Once they're drained, you want to, of course, replace the sealing washers, send them back up, and you can torque them to 22 foot-pounds. The crankcase and the oil tank have been draining for about 20 minutes and there's almost nothing coming out of them. In that time, what I did was I replaced the sealing washers on the crankcase plug and the oil tank plug. We'll be ready to send those up. And I drained all the oil into 2 oil pans and then I measured it out and it came out to be 9.5 quarts. So I'm going to go ahead and fill with 10 quarts. We want to tighten the plug on the crankcase to 52 foot-pounds. The plug on the oil tank gets torqued to 44 foot-pounds. After double checking everything underneath, we brought the car back down. Now we're ready to change the oil filter. You can of course use the special Porsche tool, or you can use a strap wrench, but this is a plastic housing and it's an open element, so it tends to tear up the housing. It's functional and it'll work, but it's kind of up to you. What I did was I bought just this cheap tool from the local parts house, which is a 76-14, and it allowed me to line the tool with nylon electrical tape, so this way it wouldn't tear up the filter housing when I'm pulling it off, and it was much more cost effective, but of course whatever works for you. So we'll pull that out and go over that now. So we'll take the tool, put it on, use a 3/8 extension with the ratchet, lock in, just back it off. I recommend grabbing a really clean pan. This way, once the filter's out, you can actually inspect it for any sort of potential issues without the possibility of something in the pan contaminating your test. We can take a look at the filter element itself. I really like open housings because you can still cut open a closed element, but it's really hard not to get contamination into the element itself for a good visual. So just you pull it back here and take a look. Just take a look in all the pleats and you're looking for any sort of metal or contaminants or debris. Now if you oil sample, this is just a double check. So I like to check on everything. Take a look at here, I don't see anything. So we'll get a new filter going. We take a look here at the filter housing just to make sure that everything is in good condition. There's a slot, a recession where you can stick a pick in to change the O-ring seal up here, and there's one other small O-ring to seal down here. If you're going to order your oil filter, you want to double check that you order the O-rings as well. Sometimes the kits only come with the filter element itself, the sealing washers, it just kind of depends. So get your list together, that way when you order everything, you have everything available and you don't get stuck. I checked the part number on the filter that came out of the 996 Turbo, and it was a 996-107 225-53. I found these in inventory, and also we seem to have 996-107 225-60s. I believe this is an updated filter, but I believe they're for the same function because we have 6 P cars. And there's just a lot of filters I always have to inventory, but as far as I know, they're the same. But just to give you a heads up, you definitely want to check with whoever you source your parts from to get the true actual number for your vehicle. Also, something to help you out, those small O-rings on the filter housing. I came across the lot of the part number. It's a 999-707-46540. So if that helps you out to source these faster, there you go. We've replaced the O-rings, lubricated the O-rings with oil, put on a new filter element, and we're almost ready to go back in. The workshop manual calls to pull any oil residual out of the filter housing. I already did this and I used a fluid evacuator, but anything like a Mighty Vac, a suction bulb will work just fine. The torque spec for the oil filter housing is 19 foot-pounds. Now that we have a new oil filter in and everything is sealed up down below, we're ready to fill the oil. The engine oil fill is this yellow cap right here with the pipe. Porsche calls to use 8.5 quarts plus or minus as an initial fill, and fill slowly to allow the pipe to evacuate. I'm going to fill with 9.5 quarts with the top off of a 1/2 quart due to my measurements of what came out of the engine. I've never seen a problem with that, and I've done many of these cars, but you should always do what you feel comfortable with. Engine oil, I've always used Mobil 1 040 factory fill. I've never had a problem. Many people may argue. Doesn't really matter to me. You should always use what's comfortable for you. I've worked on many of these cars and have not ever had a failure, so take it for what it's worth. Now that we've done the initial oil fill in the tank, we're ready to fire the car and check the oil level. I'll just walk you through the process that I take versus boring you to death with actually having to watch me do it. What I'll usually do is go to run the starter on the car 3 times, and before it actually fires and builds compression, I'll shut the ignition off and try and load the oiling system. Then on the fourth time, I'll fire it and make sure that I've got good oil pressure. On a regular car, I would run the engine for maybe 20 seconds. I'd shut it off, then check the dipstick. Unfortunately, the 996 Turbo, as I told you before, has no dipstick. So the only way is to check it on the dash. And to check it on the dash, the engine temp and oil temp have to be up. So you just have to let it idle and wait till it reaches temp and you're good to check your level. Now, the service manual calls to use 75W90 Mobile Loop PTX to change the manual transmission fluid. The change, they say, requires around 3 liters of fluid. I am not within the mileage spec to do the oil change, but if you are going to do it, it's very straightforward. You would just pull the fill plug with a 10mm Allen, then remove the drain plug, also with a 10mm Allen. Drain the fluid, change the sealing washer, send the drain plug back up, then fill the oil until it comes out of the fill hole, and change the sealing washer, send the plug back in. Both of those plugs are torqued to 22 foot-pounds. You can get a good view right here of the transmission fill plug, and down below we can find the drain plug. Porsche calls for the transmission fluid and the front differential oil to be changed at 96,000 miles. I am nowhere near that, so I will also not be servicing the front differential. However, I will show you how to pull the panels down and where the fill and drain plug locations are in case you need to do it for your own vehicle. The panel underneath the front diff is held on by 6 metal clips. The easiest way I've found to get this to go is take a flathead screwdriver and put it under the spring tab, then come in from the side with a plastic scraper, push the spring tab back, and use the plastic scraper to pull it down. Then there are 4 nylon nuts that you can remove in each corner that will allow you to remove the underpanel. Change the fluid on the front diff, you can start by using a 17mm open-end box and pulling the fill plug. Then you can use a 17mm socket to pull the drain plug. The differential holds around 1.5 liters, so once all the fluid's drained out, you can clean the plugs, send in the drain plug, and torque it to 21 foot-pounds. Porsche calls for 75W90 gear lube. Everyone has their favorite lubricant. So you'd want to fill the housing up to the level of the fill hole, then send in the fill plug. Also torque that to 21 foot-pounds. Then you're ready to roll. You want to go ahead and reverse the process and put the under panel back on, and you're set to go. This will all save you if you're interested in servicing your 996 Turbo. You just want to, of course, make sure that if you're going to do it, you've got the expertise and the skill set that you won't run into problems halfway. In any case, I hope this helps you save money and time. I'll see you next time.